Welcome to Puzzle Proof. Join us as we unravel today's captivating story and solve exciting puzzles together. Get ready to engage your mind. Let the journey start. Chapter 1. The Case Begins. It was on a grey and blustery morning in early October, with the rain spattering the window panes like a persistent drummer, that I once again found myself within the warm confines of 221B Baker Street. The fire crackled merrily in the hearth, a comforting counterpoint to the melancholy weather beyond. Sherlock Holmes stood at the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the diffused light, his eyes fixed on the street below with that particular blend of disinterest and precision which so often heralded the onset of a new case. I had scarcely removed my gloves when he turned to address me. "You will observe, Watson," he said without preamble, "that our morning promises interest." "I had hoped so," I replied, easing into my familiar armchair beside the fire. My medical rounds were light, and I find myself unusually unoccupied. "What have you deduced from the fog and the footsteps this morning?" Holmes permitted himself the ghost of a smile. "You may shortly judge for yourself. We are to have a visitor, a young man of education and breeding, yet clearly troubled. He will arrive within the next few minutes, travelling on foot, and in some haste." I raised an eyebrow. "And you have gleaned all this from the street?" "From the street and the post," he said. "A telegram arrived 10 minutes ago. I read it while you were hanging your coat." He passed it to me. The message was terse. "Urgent. Require consultation immediately. Personal matter. Arriving shortly. L. Prescott. Prescott." I murmured a familiar name. Holmes's gaze returned to the window. "It should be. The Prescotts of Cromere Hall are an old Lincolnshire family of moderate wealth and long-standing repute. I recall a minor scandal involving the elder son some years ago. Debts, I believe, but nothing criminal. The name on the telegram is L. Prescott. That would be Lionel Prescott, the younger son. You know him?" "Number, but I know of him. Studied briefly at Oxford, abandoned his studies for travel, reappeared last year in London in some minor clerical position, kept largely out of the public eye. And you expect him imminently?" Holmes nodded. "His lodgings are in Kensington. The rain would deter a cab. He will arrive by foot, unless I miss my mark." A knock at the door interrupted him. Mrs. Hudson appeared a moment later with a young man in tow. The visitor was indeed as Holmes had described, tall and spare, perhaps in his late 20s, with straw blonde hair flattened by the damp, and a strained expression about the mouth and eyes that bespoke worry, bordering on desperation. He clutched a pair of leather gloves in one hand, the other clenching and unclenching at his side. "Mr. Lionel Prescott," Holmes said with quiet certainty. "You are most welcome. Please come in and be seated. This is my colleague, Dr. Watson." Prescott nodded absently in my direction and took the offered chair opposite Holmes. For a moment he simply stared into the fire, as if collecting his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was low and uneven. "Mr. Holmes, forgive the intrusion. I am at my wit's end. My sister has disappeared, vanished without a trace." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "Begin at the beginning, Mr. Prescott. The facts, if you please. No conjecture." Yes, of course." He ran a hand through his damp hair. "My sister, Violet Prescott, left our family estate at Cromere Hall last Tuesday. She was travelling to London to visit an old school friend, a Miss Margaret Lane, who lives in Bloomsbury. She arrived safely. I received a letter confirming as much on Wednesday, but 2 days later she vanished. No message, no clue, no sign of departure. Miss Lane says Violet left the house on Thursday morning and never returned." "Was your sister in the habit of leaving without explanation?" "Never. Violet is quiet but meticulous. She would never vanish without informing someone, me at the very least." Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin. And what was the purpose of her visit? To be candid, I'm not certain. She said she wished to visit several booksellers, she's an avid reader, and possibly a gallery or two. But the visit seemed sudden. She'd received a letter the week prior. I asked about it, but she brushed it off, said it was nothing important. Do you have this letter? Number, she took it with her? Curious, Holmes murmured. And how long was she meant to stay in London? Just a few days. She packed lightly, a small trunk and a handbag, nothing to suggest she intended an extended visit. Holmes rose and began to pace slowly before the hearth. Did she have any known enemies, or entanglements? A suitor, perhaps? Prescott looked affronted. Violet is not the sort to form imprudent attachments. She was always reserved. She had admirers, certainly, but never reciprocated with more than polite indifference. As for enemies, I can think of none. She's a gentle soul, Mr. Holmes. Sometimes, Holmes said thoughtfully, the gentlest souls tread closest to the edge of danger simply because they expect none from others. You mentioned Miss Lane. She is trustworthy? I believe so. Violet and Margaret were schoolmates at Cheltenham. They've remained close. And no word at all since Thursday? None. Miss Lane wired me in distress. I came to London that night and spoke to her myself. The police have been notified, but they dismissed the case as a flight of fancy. Young women often go wandering in the city, they said, but this is not some romantic escapade, Mr. Holmes. Something is dreadfully wrong. Holmes halted mid-step. I do not disagree, Mr. Prescott. If your account is accurate, then this disappearance bears all the hallmarks of premeditation or coercion. We shall visit Miss Lane at once. He turned to me. Watson, if you would be so kind as to fetch your coat, we shall begin in Bloomsbury. I stood. You believe she was taken? Holmes's eyes gleamed. I believe nothing yet, but I observe, and soon I shall know. As we stepped out into the rain-soaked streets of London, I could not help the flicker of unease that passed through me. I had seen Holmes in many moods, indolent, impatient, exhilarated, but the quiet resolve on his face that morning bespoke something else entirely. He had scented a trail, faint though it was, and he would follow it wherever it led. The game, as ever, was afoot. Chapter 2. The Missing Violet. The rain had lessened to a persistent drizzle by the time Holmes, Prescott and I reached Bloomsbury. The street on which Miss Margaret Lane resided was a narrow and respectable one, lined with tall, soot-darkened terraced houses. A lamplighter, huddled in his oilskin, trudged past us in the gloom, and a distant carriage wheel clattered on the cobbles. The hour was still early, yet the city already thrummed with the muffled heartbeat of activity. Miss Lane's residence was the upper floor of a modest but well-maintained townhouse. She received us with a pale face and reddened eyes, though she attempted to compose herself upon seeing Holmes and myself. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, she said, as she ushered us inside. And Mr. Prescott, you've returned quickly. I brought help, Prescott said gently. Mr. Holmes is the most capable man in London for this kind of matter. Miss Lane gave a distracted nod and led us into a drawing-room that, though small, bore the tasteful touch of a woman with both intelligence and means. A small coal fire provided welcome warmth, and a pot of tea sat untouched on a tray beside the window. The room smelled faintly of lavender and ash. Holmes remained standing, his keen eyes flicking across the room as though it were a map. After a moment of silence, he spoke in a tone neither abrupt nor indulgent. Miss Lane, I would be obliged if you could recount Miss Violet Prescott's visit, from the moment of her arrival to her departure on the morning of her disappearance. Please speak with precision. Omit nothing, however trivial it may seem. Margaret Lane drew a deep breath, gathering herself. Violet arrived late Tuesday afternoon. I met her at the station. She had her small travelling trunk and a handbag. She was in good spirits, if a little distracted. We dined here that evening, and she spoke mainly of her family, of books she'd been reading, and asked after some of our old school friends. She said she wished to visit several second-hand bookshops during her stay. On Wednesday, she spent the day browsing in the shops along Charing Cross Road and returned around 4. That evening she mentioned she intended to visit the Albian gallery the next morning. She left the house Thursday morning. Yes, just after 10. She wore her navy blue walking coat and a pair of neat leather gloves. She carried a small handbag and left without breakfast, said she would get a bite while out. That was the last I saw of her. Did she say whom she might meet at the gallery? Holmes asked. No one in particular. She simply said she'd heard of a recent acquisition of interest and wanted to see it for herself. Did she give any indication that she was uneasy, anxious, or afraid? Miss Lane hesitated. She did seem preoccupied. I asked her whether something was on her mind, but she gave me a wan smile and said it was nothing more than shadows from home. I took it to mean a family matter. She did not return that evening. By 6 o'clock I began to worry. I sent a note to the gallery but received no reply. I searched the local streets, asked at the nearby stations. Nothing. That night I sat up, hoping she might still come back, but she did not. Holmes glanced around the room once more. Her trunk is still here? Yes, upstairs in the guest room. I didn't touch it. Then we shall examine it now, if you would be so good, Miss Lane. We followed her up a narrow staircase to a tidy guest bedroom. The room was plainly furnished, a single bed, a writing desk, a chair, and a narrow wardrobe. On a small stand near the foot of the bed sat the trunk, a medium-sized piece of dark green leather, scuffed at the corners but otherwise well kept. Holmes knelt beside it, drawing on a pair of thin gloves from his coat pocket. Unlocked, he murmured. She intended no secrecy in her departure. He opened it carefully. Inside were garments folded with neat precision, nightclothes, a spare pair of shoes, a comb, and a small toiletry bag. On top of it all lay a novel, Northanger Abbey, its pages dog-eared and annotated in a delicate hand. Holmes extracted a pair of walking shoes and examined the soles clean. Barely worn, not the shoes she wore Thursday. Correct? Said Miss Lane. She left wearing her newer pair, dark brown with a narrow heel. Holmes looked to the umbrella stand in the corner of the room. And her umbrella? Miss Lane blinked. Still here, I believe. Holmes crossed the room in 3 strides and withdrew the handle of a slim black parasol. He held it up with a frown. She went out on a rainy October morning and left this behind? I hadn't considered that, Miss Lane admitted. You must understand, Holmes said softly. For a woman like Miss Prescott, disciplined, observant, careful in appearance, this is most unlike her. She would not risk damaging her gloves or shoes, nor let vanity override her sense. Then you think, what? Holmes placed the umbrella down gently. Either she intended to return very soon, or she never expected, or was never permitted to return at all. There was a silence in the room, broken only by the soft hiss of the wind at the window. Has anything else vanished? Holmes asked. Jewellery, letters. Miss Lane shook her head. All her jewellery is still in her case on the dressing table. Then she left with only what she carried. Yes. Holmes turned to Prescott. Mr. Prescott, I must ask you, did your sister stand to inherit or be named in any family document of importance, wills, trusts, claims? Prescott's brow furrowed. Nothing immediate. Our family estate is entailed to my elder brother, as is tradition. Violet is mentioned in our mother's will, I believe, but nothing extravagant, just personal effects and a few small bonds. Why? Holmes did not answer. He walked slowly around the room once more, trailing a gloved finger along the edges of the furniture, then paused beside the writing desk. On its surface sat an inkstand, a blotter, and a few slips of notepaper. He examined the blotter closely, held it to the light, then gave a small nod of satisfaction. She wrote something. Here, that morning. He turned to Yoink. "Watson, your pencil, if you please." I handed it over, and Holmes gently shaded the blotter with the side of the pencil. Slowly, ghostly words began to emerge. "If I am not back by sundown, destroy this note. Trust no one." Miss Lane gasped. Prescott's face drained of colour. Holmes said nothing for a moment, only examined the recovered imprint again with grave intensity. Then he folded it, placed it carefully in his breast pocket, and spoke at last. Miss Prescott was afraid, and she took precautions. What remains now is to discover precisely what, or whom, she feared. Chapter 3. Shadows at the Albion. We departed Bloomsbury beneath a sombre sky, the earlier drizzle thickening once again into a reluctant rain. Holmes walked briskly, his long strides cutting through the damp air, his coat flaring slightly behind him, as though propelled by the sheer force of his thoughts. Prescott and I followed, the young man glancing at Holmes with alternating hope and apprehension. Our destination lay just south of Fitzrovia. The Albion Gallery, a modest yet well-regarded exhibition hall tucked discreetly into the curve of a narrow street. It specialised in contemporary British artists, and though it lacked the pomp of the Royal Academy, it had become known for attracting discerning patrons and those in search of quiet brilliance. The gallery appeared almost deserted as we arrived. A young woman, slender and neat in a wool dress, sat behind a polished desk near the entrance. She looked up with polite curiosity as we entered. "Good morning," Holmes said, doffing his hat. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and these are Dr. Watson and Mr. Lionel Prescott. We're making inquiries regarding a Miss Violet Prescott, who is believed to have visited here last Thursday morning. May I speak with whoever was on duty that day?" The young woman blinked. "I was on the morning shift, sir." "Miss Prescott, let me think." She tapped her chin thoughtfully. "Yes, I believe I remember her. A tall young lady, fair-haired, quite composed. She arrived a little after 10. Holmes's eyes flickered with interest. Was she alone? The woman hesitated. "Initially, yes. She asked after a particular painting, one of Mr. Granger's seascapes. I showed her to the third room on the left. And after that? She remained in that room for perhaps 20 minutes. I recall she was approached by a gentleman. Well-dressed, dark coat. I assumed they were acquaintances." Holmes's voice sharpened slightly. "You assumed, but did they speak?" "Oh yes, I heard them from the desk faintly." She sounded startled at first, then uncertain. "I believe he persuaded her to step outside. Did they leave together?" "Yes, sir. Through the main entrance. It was a little before 11. I remember thinking it odd. She hadn't stayed long, and she hadn't even viewed the second floor." Holmes drew a notebook from his pocket and scribbled a brief note. "Describe the man, if you would," she pursed her lips. "Average height, perhaps a bit shorter than you. Dark hair, combed back, impeccably dressed, though not flamboyantly. A gentleman, certainly. He wore gloves, I believe, dark leather." "Did he give a name or leave a calling card?" "No, sir. I didn't speak to him. They left quietly." "Was anyone else in the gallery at the time?" The woman thought for a moment. "A pair of students, I think, and an elderly gentleman from the press. They were in the other rooms. None seemed to take notice of the couple." Holmes nodded slowly. "Thank you. One final point. Did Miss Prescott leave anything behind? A glove? A handkerchief?" The woman frowned. "No, I should have noticed. Holmes thanked her, then turned and walked calmly into the third room, the rest of us in tow. The gallery's interior was hushed, reverent. Thick carpets and high skylights lent a solemnity to the proceedings, as though even the paintings were whispering among themselves. Room 3 contained 4 seascapes, each more turbulent than the last, towering grey waves, jagged rocks, brooding skies. "She came here," Holmes murmured, scanning the room, "with purpose. She asked for this room specifically. A painting, perhaps, or a person she expected to meet." Prescott shook his head. Violet never mentioned a specific painting. Holmes moved slowly about the space, examining each painting, then the floor, then the baseboards, finally stopping at a side window that overlooked the street. He bent down to inspect the latch. Closed, no sign of tampering. I stepped closer to him. "You believe she may have tried to escape through the window?" Holmes gave a non-committal shrug. "I believe in knowing every possibility before discarding it." He straightened and addressed Prescott. "Mr. Prescott, do you recognize the style of these paintings? Anything that might have drawn your sister here?" The young man looked at the canvases without much conviction. "She did have a fondness for maritime art, but I don't recognize this artist. Granger, you said?" Holmes nodded. "Edward Granger, relatively new but rising fast. I attended a lecture last spring at which one of his pieces was analyzed in the context of metaphorical dread, a favorite of the modern symbolists. He paused before one of the paintings, the shore at low tide, a jagged beach under a steel sky, a wrecked ship half buried in the sand, and, almost hidden in the corner, a small figure in white staring out to sea." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "Note the figure in the lower left." I peered closer. "A woman, perhaps?" Holmes nodded. "Or a girl. The ambiguity is deliberate, but observe her posture, rigid, watching, waiting. Granger's critics interpret her as a symbol of abandonment." He tapped the frame lightly. "This was the painting Violet asked after." Prescott's voice was tight. "Are you suggesting she came to see a metaphor?" "I suggest," Holmes replied softly, "that the painting may have represented something to her. Something or someone." He turned on his heel. "Come, gentlemen. We have learned 2 vital facts. First, that Miss Prescott was indeed seen here, and second, that she departed in the company of a man unknown to her companions. That narrows our inquiry substantially." As we exited the gallery, Holmes paused on the threshold and glanced up and down the street. "This gallery receives regular visitors," he mused, "and yet no one has come forward. That suggests our mysterious gentleman did not wish to be remembered." Prescott looked stricken. "You think he meant to harm her?" "I think," said Holmes, "that Violet Prescott knew him, at least by name. I think she expected something ordinary, perhaps even civil, and found herself caught in something altogether more dangerous." He hailed a passing hansom. "Where now?" I asked. "To the source of the seascape," Holmes said. "Granger is exhibiting another work tonight at a private club in Mayfair. It is time we met the artist and the patrons who admire him." He turned to Prescott. "You must return to your lodgings. If this gentleman recognizes you, he may be less inclined to speak freely." Prescott reluctantly nodded. "And you truly believe this painter is connected?" Holmes climbed into the cab. "Every brushstroke tells a story, Mr. Prescott. But sometimes the story lies behind the canvas." With that, the cab rattled away into the damp London mist, and I, seated beside Holmes, could feel the case tightening around us, threads pulling unseen, yet certain, drawing us ever closer to the heart of a mystery that was far from ordinary. Chapter 4. The Man in the Grey Cravat. The Mayfair Club was one of those discreet establishments nestled between 2 tall Georgian facades, its brass plaque polished daily, and its entrance flanked by twin gas lamps that flickered like solemn sentinels. Though few Londoners knew it by name, its drawing rooms had seen more whispered confidences and scandalous pacts than Parliament itself. To gain entry was no simple matter, except, of course, if one was Sherlock Holmes. We arrived just before 8 in the evening, having first secured an invitation through Holmes's occasional acquaintance with a minor viscount fond of obscure art and even more obscure whiskey. The front hall was scented faintly of pipe smoke and oiled wood. A liveried attendant bowed us in, our names signed into a discreet ledger. Inside, the exhibition had been arranged with practiced elegance. Oil paintings adorned the panelled walls beneath high ceilings, while clusters of patrons murmured behind champagne flutes and monocles. A quartet played softly in the adjoining parlour. Holmes drifted among the guests like smoke, insubstantial, silent, and somehow always where he needed to be. I followed closely, noting several seascapes I recognized as Granger's, moody vistas of storm-lashed cliffs and wind-bent trees, their colors brooding and beautiful. Yet it was not the paintings that captured Holmes's attention. It was the people. "There," he murmured, barely tilting his head. "Near the hearth. The gentleman in the grey cravat. I saw him. A lean figure of about 40, with sharp features and a meticulously groomed moustache. His eyes were pale and unblinking, like a hawk's. He wore a tailored coat and a grey silk cravat fastened with a jet pin. He has the air of a man accustomed to being obeyed," Holmes observed. "And note, he watches the door." "You believe this is the man from the Albian gallery?" "I believe he is the sort who leaves few footprints and fewer explanations." We approached slowly, Holmes affecting an idle air. "Mr. Edward Granger, I presume?" he said affably. The man turned. "No," he replied, his voice low and crisp. "I fear you are mistaken." Holmes's eyes twinkled. "Ah, forgive me. The way you examined the lighting above the centerpiece suggested a painter's eye." The man gave the faintest smile. "A student of the arts, not their creator." "I see. My name is Sherlock Holmes." That gave the man pause. He inclined his head, polite but cautious. "A pleasure, Mr. Holmes, though I confess I did not expect to encounter a detective at a private showing." "A harmless indulgence," Holmes replied. "My companion, Dr. Watson, has recently developed a taste for coastal subjects." I nodded stiffly, suppressing my surprise. Holmes had never mentioned such an interest, because it didn't exist. The man's eyes rested on me a moment, then returned to Holmes. "And what opinion have you formed of Mr. Granger's technique?" "Storm and subtlety," Holmes said. "He renders violence with elegance, particularly in his earlier pieces." A flicker of recognition crossed the man's face, quick, but not quick enough to escape Holmes's notice. "You are a connoisseur," the man said evenly. "Merely attentive," Holmes replied. "A quality useful in all professions. Might I inquire your name?" The man hesitated only briefly. "Trevelyan. Henry Trevelyan of the Norfolk Trevelyans?" "A distant branch. My pursuits are mercantile." "I see." Holmes glanced idly at a painting. "Tell me, Mr. Trevelyan, were you at the Albian gallery last Thursday morning?" Trevelyan's lips thinned slightly. "I was not. Why?" Holmes smiled mildly. "An old friend of mine mentioned a gentleman matching your description. I thought perhaps it was coincidence." Trevelyan said nothing, but his pale eyes hardened. Holmes continued with disarming calm. "It's of little consequence. The lady in question, Miss Violet Prescott, vanished later that same day." There it was, just a momentary stiffness in the jaw, a tightening of the fingers around his glass, subtle. But I saw it, and so did Holmes. "I'm afraid I don't know the name," Trevelyan said coolly. Holmes inclined his head. Of course. And yet, I wonder, Mr. Trevelyan, have you ever been painted? That caught the man off guard. Painted? Yes. Your profile would suit a certain type of portrait, angular, refined. A face that leaves an impression. Trevelyan turned abruptly. If you'll excuse me, gentlemen, I see someone I must greet. He strode away into the throng, disappearing behind a group of gentlemen near the refreshment table. Holmes watched him go, then turned to me. Well, he said, he lies. You're certain? As certain as I am of the tide in the Thames, he recognized the name Violet Prescott. More importantly, he feared what I might know. Do you believe he's involved in her disappearance? Holmes's eyes glittered. I believe Mr. Trevelyan is no merchant, nor a mere student of art. The way he carried himself, military possibly. Intelligence more likely, and he's been painted. I blinked. What do you mean? Holmes gestured discreetly to the far end of the room. There, half-shadowed in a corner, hung a modest canvas, unassuming in style, lacking the tumult of Granger's other works. It depicted a man standing at the edge of a cliff, wind pulling at his coat, his face turned to the sea. I noticed it earlier, Holmes said. The subject was familiar. That painting is recent, unsigned and unattributed, yet here it hangs. I moved closer. The likeness was undeniable. Trevelyan? I murmured. Indeed, the man in the grey cravat, rendered in tones of grey and blue, cold, distant and watching. The artist saw him clearly. You believe Violet Prescott saw this painting? I believe she came to see it, Holmes replied. Whether by accident or design, she recognized the subject. And then she vanished. The implications chilled me. Holmes's expression had grown graver still. We must discover what binds Violet to this man, he said softly. Whether it is art, affection, or blackmail, I do not yet know, but Trevelyan holds a key, and somewhere in this city, a young woman is either in hiding or in grave danger. He turned toward the exit. We shall call upon Mr. Granger tomorrow, he said. If his brushes have painted both wreckage and revelation, he must now be asked which was real. And with that, we stepped back out into the October night. Rain misting in the gaslight, mystery hanging as thick in the air as fog over the Thames. Chapter 5. The Artist's Silence. The following morning dawned grey and sullen, the sky hanging low over London like a lid of tarnished pewter. Holmes was already at the breakfast table by the time I joined him, a plate of untouched toast at his elbow, and the morning edition of the Times folded sharply beside his cup. Nothing of Violet Prescott in the press, he said, without looking up. Not even a whisper, which means someone, somewhere, is ensuring that her name remains absent from public knowledge. That could be the work of Trevelyan, I suggested, pouring coffee, if he has influence in official circles. Precisely, Holmes replied. An influence has many faces, Watson, social, financial, or the more sinister kind born in dark corners of government. He rose, folded his coat over one arm and reached for his hat. To Camden Town, Granger keeps a studio there. If we are to strip the veil from this affair, we must speak to the man whose brushes may have painted more than seascapes. The address had been gleaned the previous evening from a discreet inquiry with the Mayfair Club's curator, a man of withered appearance and murmured confidences who, once Holmes had prodded the right nerve, proved surprisingly informative. We arrived at number 8, Winterley Street, just before 10. The building was narrow and peeling, wedged between a tobacconist and a small print shop. A tarnished bell hung beside the door, which Holmes rang once, sharply. A long pause followed, then shuffling steps, and the door creaked open a bare 6 inches. A pale face appeared, framed by a tangle of dark hair and a nervous expression. The man was lean, ink-stained, and dressed in an old coat 2 sizes too large. "Edward Granger Holmes?" asked. "Yes," the man replied warily. "My name is Sherlock Holmes. This is Dr. Watson. We seek a word with you regarding a woman named Violet Prescott." The door opened fully now. Granger's eyes widened slightly and he stepped back. "Come in," he said, his voice hoarse. The studio was cluttered but not disordered. Tall windows filtered in the washed-out daylight, casting long shadows across a floor scattered with canvases, sketchbooks, and the scent of turpentine. An easel stood in one corner, facing an unfinished painting of storm clouds over a solitary jetty. "Miss Prescott came here once," Granger said before Holmes could speak. 3 weeks ago, she saw one of my works at the Albian gallery, the shore at low tide. She said she recognized someone in it. Holmes's expression remained neutral. "And did she?" Granger hesitated. "I don't know. She seemed startled by the figure I painted. Said she'd seen the man before. She didn't give a name." "But you know who he is?" Granger ran a hand through his hair. "No, not exactly. I painted him from memory. He approached me about a portrait last year, in a private arrangement. Said he wanted something quiet, nothing official. Paid handsomely in advance. Never gave his real name." Holmes stepped closer. "Describe him tall, sharp-faced, piercing eyes, controlled, too controlled. He gave me a false name, I'm sure of it. Claimed to be a diplomat, but he wasn't like any diplomat I've ever met." "Do you have sketches? Preliminary studies?" Granger hesitated again, but then crossed the room to a locked cabinet. He removed a key from his pocket and opened it. Inside were several portfolios. He rifled through them and pulled out a page. Holmes took it and studied the pencil rendering. It was unmistakable. Trevelyan, though younger, and without the grey cravat. The angle of the jaw, the set of the eyes, it was a perfect likeness. "Why did he wish to be painted?" Holmes asked. "I never asked," Granger muttered. "He made it clear the portrait was not to be exhibited or copied. He collected it himself. But I kept a few sketches, unwise perhaps, but I liked the composition." "Miss Prescott saw this?" Granger nodded. "She turned pale, asked if I knew the man. I told her only what I've told you. She left in haste. I didn't think much of it at the time. People often react oddly to my work." Holmes's voice dropped. "Did she say anything else?" Granger shook his head. "Only that she had once known a man who made others disappear. I thought it melodramatic, but now—" "She said that?" I asked. Granger nodded gravely. Holmes turned to me. "That phrase is telling, Watson. Not that the man vanished, but that he made others disappear. It suggests power, perhaps even official sanction. You believe Trevelyan works in some covert branch of the government?" I asked. "I believe Trevelyan may not be his name," Holmes replied, "and that Miss Prescott stumbled upon a man who has gone to great lengths to ensure his anonymity." Granger looked nervous. "If I've been dragged into something, you already are." Holmes interrupted gently. "But you've done nothing wrong. On the contrary, you may have provided the single piece of evidence that connects Trevelyan to Violet Prescott." He replaced the sketch in the folder, returned it to the cabinet, and locked it once more. Holmes turned toward the door. "One more question, Mr. Granger. You say he came here to collect the portrait himself?" "Yes." "Alone?" Granger's brow furrowed. "No, actually, now that you mention it. He was accompanied. A younger woman, blonde, quiet. I assumed she was a relation." Holmes's eyes narrowed. 3 weeks ago?" "Yes." He nodded curtly. "Thank you. You have been most helpful. We may call again." We left the studio in silence until we reached the street. Holmes's pace quickened. "You think that woman was Violet?" I asked. "I think it almost certain. But that means she wasn't just following Trevelyan, she was with him. Willingly, or under duress, Holmes replied. There is a form of compliance that resembles consent, when the stakes are high enough. We climbed into a cab, and Holmes tapped the roof. To Scotland Yard. Lestrade? I asked. Not yet. But if Trevelyan is using an alias, I want access to government personnel records. There are ways to obtain such things. I looked at him. You're convinced he's connected to the government? I'm convinced, Holmes said grimly, that Violet Prescott knew something she wasn't supposed to, and that Trevelyan is the kind of man who ensures secrets stay buried. As the cab rattled off toward Westminster, I couldn't help but feel that we were plunging not just into a case of disappearance, but into something darker, coiled tightly beneath the surface of power and respectability. Chapter 6. Beneath the surface. Our journey to Scotland Yard was cut short just beyond Trafalgar Square, where Holmes ordered the cab to halt abruptly. We shan't involve Lestrade yet, he said. The waters we're navigating run deeper than Yard jurisdiction. No, Watson, we must first make contact with someone who understands the channels beneath London's surface, those that never appear in public ledgers. You mean the underworld? I mean Whitehall's shadow, Holmes replied. Men like Trevelyan do not work alone. They are part of a system designed to conceal. We walked the remainder of the way to a quiet row of buildings just off Pall Mall, where the soot-stained stonework and discreet brass knockers whispered of institutional importance. Holmes led us into a nondescript building, marked only by a letterbox and a porter who eyed us warily. We've come to see Mr. Stamford, Holmes said. Have you an appointment, sir? Tell him Mr. Sherlock Holmes requires 5 minutes of his candour. He may recall a kindness extended during the matter of the Radcliffe cipher. The name and the hint of favours past had the desired effect. Within moments we were ushered into a cramped parlour lined with filing cabinets and the scent of dust and pipe smoke. A small man emerged from behind a curtain of ledgers, spectacles perched precariously on his nose. He recognised Holmes at once. My word, he said, I'd heard whispers you were abroad. What brings you to this corner of ignominy? A man who calls himself Henry Trevelyan, Holmes replied, and a missing woman named Violet Prescott. Stamford's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. Trevelyan? Interesting. That's not a name that shows up in service rosters, at least not under his real identity. Then you know who he is? I know of him, Stamford replied slowly. Or rather, I know of the position he once occupied. Intelligence Coordination Division, what used to be called Department Z in the pre-war years. Unofficial even by unofficial standards. Operated out of Dover House. Deep pockets, clean records. And now? Disbanded, publicly. But these things have a habit of surviving. Different name, different funding. And Trevelyan? Stamford pursed his lips. Likely still active in some capacity. The division specialized in asset management and political sanitation. Sanitation? I interrupted. A euphemism, Holmes murmured. Precisely, said Stamford. Trevelyan, though that name is certainly an alias, was reputed to be methodical, detached, and impossible to intimidate, a ghost with friends in all the wrong places. Was he ever involved in public operations? Holmes asked. Stamford hesitated. One, a minor political scandal, disappeared before trial. Witnesses retracted, files sealed. After that, Trevelyan's name vanished even from whispered record. Until now, it seems. Would there be anyone within the division who might know his true identity? Stamford looked at him hard. If there is, they'll deny it. These men vanish because it is safer that way, for everyone. Holmes gave a faint smile. Then we must do what they fear most. Bring something hidden into the light. We left shortly afterward, stepping once again into the light drizzle that had persisted all morning. Holmes walked briskly, his brow furrowed with rare intensity. "You see, Watson," he said, "we are dealing not merely with a crime, but with a construct. Trevelyan was likely involved in operations designed to silence. When Violet Prescott recognized him, she became a liability." "Do you think she worked for the government?" "Possibly. Or perhaps someone close to her did. Trevelyan's presence at the Albian gallery suggests a coincidence too neat for comfort." We turned towards Soho, where Holmes had arranged a meeting with a man named Pellington, a former Foreign Office secretary turned disgraced informant, a source of valuable rot, as Holmes once put it. Pellington received us in a tobacco-stained parlour above a pawnbroker's, flanked by 3 empty gin bottles and a half-written letter of apology to a woman named Maud. Holmes wasted no time. "Trevelyan, real name, movements, and current association. Speak carefully, and there's a sovereign in it." Pellington's eyes twinkled with drunken cunning. "Trevelyan? That's a name I've not heard in a year or more. Slippery devil. They used him for clean-up jobs." "Go on." "Some say he operated in France. Others say Russia. He's got papers for 5 identities and a face for none. But there's one place he's been seen lately, down by the old Langdon Street lodgings. A girl used to visit him there, blonde, quiet." Holmes leaned forward. "Do you know the girl's name?" Pellington shrugged. "Didn't hear it, but she'd come and go like smoke. Not the sort you'd expect with a man like him." Holmes stood and handed him the promised coin. "Langdon Street, thank you." As we descended the stairs, I asked, "Is it her, Holmes? Violet?" "I think so," he said. "But we're missing something still, something important." We arrived at Langdon Street before dusk. The neighbourhood had the air of a place recently forgotten. The buildings were close, their bricks dark with soot and secrecy. We found the address easily, number 12, a narrow house with shuttered windows. Holmes peered through the letterbox. "Abandoned," he said. "Yet there are signs of recent occupancy. Paper ash in the grate, fresh boot, scuffs at the threshold." He picked the lock in under a minute, and we entered cautiously. The air inside was musty but not stale. Someone had been there recently. The sitting room was modest with sparse furnishings. A cup sat on the mantel, half full. Holmes examined it. "Lipstick," he muttered. "Rose-coloured. Recent." He moved to a writing desk and opened the drawer. Inside was a single envelope. Holmes lifted it with tweezers. No address. Only 2 words in neat, slanted handwriting. "Forgive me." I glanced at Holmes. "Suicide?" "No," he said firmly. This was left deliberately. She wanted someone to find it. He opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph, grainy and faded. It showed a man, Trevelyan, standing beside another man whose face was circled in ink. The back read simply, "He is the one." "Not Henry." Holmes stared at it. "Watson," he said slowly, "we have made a mistake. Trevelyan is not the spider, but the web." "You mean he's not the real threat?" "Exactly. Violet feared him, yes, but she feared someone else more, someone behind him." The puzzle had deepened, and somewhere in the shadows of London, the true puppeteer still pulled the strings. Chapter 7. The Man in the Photograph. We returned to Baker Street in silence, the rain falling in a fine mist that beaded upon Holmes's collar and dripped soundlessly from the brim of his hat. I could tell his mind was grinding like the internal gears of some unseen machine, quiet, steady, relentless. Back in our sitting room, Holmes laid the photograph and envelope upon the desk, turning the image toward the lamplight. I drew up beside him. Trevelyan's face was unmistakable, cold, watchful, fixed in a gaze that bore no warmth, but it was the circled man beside him who now drew all our attention. "Recognize him?" Holmes asked. I shook my head. "Number though there's something military about his bearing. Indeed, Holmes murmured. That chin, the stiff shoulders, the stance. Yes, this is a man who once stood before others and expected to be obeyed. He picked up his magnifying glass and studied the photograph more closely. The background suggests a coastal installation, those railings, the chalk cliffs in the distance, not Dover, but somewhere southeast, possibly Hastings or Rye. The image is at least 5 years old, but Violet Prescott had clearly marked him as the danger. He is the one, not Henry, not Trevelyan then, this man. Holmes stood suddenly and crossed to the bookshelves. We must discover who he is. Once we do, everything else will fall into place, but our methods must now turn away from guesswork to something more precise. He reached for a slender volume bound in blue calfskin, the illustrated register of defense and naval attachés. Every man of significance in military or diplomatic service eventually finds his likeness here. He flipped through the pages rapidly, cross-referencing features, dates, and the faded uniform details visible in the photograph. Minutes passed in tense quiet until Holmes tapped the page sharply. "Here," he said, turning the register toward me. The name beneath the portrait read Colonel Sebastian Harcourt, retired, formerly of the Department of External Operations. "Now that," Holmes said with a grim smile, "is a name I've not heard in some years." "Who is he?" "A ghost in his own right," Holmes replied. "During the last years of the colonial campaigns, Harcourt's name appeared frequently and then vanished entirely. Whispers in intelligence circles suggested he was involved in interrogations, disinformation, and other murkier tasks. Men like Harcourt didn't merely gather intelligence, they eliminated it." "And you think Violet Prescott knew him?" "I believe she knew what he'd done. Perhaps she once served near him or encountered one of his cleansings. She recognized his face in the gallery or the studio. Perhaps he saw her too. But if he is behind all this, what of Trevelyan? I suspect Trevelyan serves him, as a blade serves the hand." Holmes lit a cigarette and paced. "We must determine whether Harcourt is still alive, and where. If we can find him, Watson, we may find Violet." "How?" Holmes turned to me. "Because if she feared him, she may have sought to confront him, or expose him." I fetched my coat again, sighing inwardly at the prospect of another wet journey. "We start," Holmes said, "with Harcourt's last known residence. By mid-afternoon we arrived at a tall, narrow townhouse in St. John's Wood, quiet and well kept, with polished steps and a discreet brass number plate. Number 47. A uniformed housekeeper answered the door and informed us that Colonel Harcourt no longer resided there. "He left last year, sir," she said. "Sold the property and went abroad, I believe." "Do you recall where?" Holmes asked. The woman looked hesitant. "I heard mention of Portugal, or perhaps Malta. He didn't leave a forwarding address." Holmes pressed a half-crown into her palm. "And visitors? Had he any?" "Not many. A younger man came often in the final weeks. Polite, dark-haired, foreign maybe." "Not Trevelyan?" "No, sir. This one was thinner, always wore gloves, carried a black valise." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. "May we view the study?" "Beg pardon, sir, but the new owners—" Holmes produced a card and wrote a name upon it. "Tell them Mr. Benedict from the Colonial Office seeks confirmation of a map registry discrepancy. 10 minutes only." A slight lie, but a necessary one. Inside the study was a Spartan room, empty bookshelves, an extinguished hearth, and the scent of old leather. Holmes examined the window latches, floorboards, and fireplace. He paused near a wall panel. "This has been disturbed," he muttered, running his fingers along a barely perceptible seam. He pressed gently, and a narrow drawer sprang open. Inside lay an envelope, sealed, addressed in the same slanted handwriting as before. Holmes slit it open. A note fell out. To the man who finds this, I was not mad. I was right, and they are everywhere. If I vanish, he is the reason. VP below, it was a single line. They will say it was of my own doing. Do not believe them. She wrote this here, Holmes said softly, before she disappeared, and she meant it to be found. Then she knew she would vanish. She suspected it, Holmes replied, or was warned, possibly by Trevelyan, possibly by Harcourt himself. He pocketed the note. We must locate Harcourt, and we must do so quickly. That evening, back in Baker Street, Holmes sent telegrams to 3 former colleagues in the Foreign Office and 2 former agents in Lisbon and Valletta. He left nothing to chance. Then, while sipping a rare glass of brandy, he finally looked me in the eye. Watson, let us suppose that Violet did not disappear of her own volition, but was taken. And suppose further that she left these messages as breadcrumbs. Why? To ensure someone followed them. Exactly. She trusted someone would pursue the truth, not the police, not the government. Someone outside that machinery. You? He nodded once. I believe she left that gallery because she recognized a monster in fine clothing. I believe she sought to expose something buried so deeply in the soil of empire that few dared speak it. And I believe Trevelyan, whatever his real name, was ordered to remove her. But he hesitated. Why? Because he was compromised. Emotionally, perhaps, or morally, we cannot know yet. I leaned forward. And what do we do next? Holmes smiled faintly. We go to Harcourt, or rather we let Harcourt come to us. Bait? Precisely. We now possess something he cannot allow to surface, Violet's testimony. If he believes we intend to publish it, or deliver it to the right hands, he will act. And when he does, Watson, we shall be waiting. He leaned back, the firelight catching the edge of his sharp cheekbones. It is dangerous, I grant you, he said. But if we do not spring the trap, Miss Prescott may vanish forever into that silent place where truths are drowned. Chapter 8. The Final Unmasking. 3 days passed in uneasy silence. Outside, London moved in its ceaseless rhythm, unaware that a delicate thread of treachery and truth twisted quietly toward a reckoning. Within the familiar rooms of Baker Street, Holmes prepared for the endgame with the calm precision of a master strategist. Each morning brought new telegrams, replies from distant contacts, fragments of a pattern slowly resolving. Holmes read them without expression, burning each note after memorizing its contents. Then on the 4th morning, he turned to me. "It is time," he said. "Harcourt has returned." "You're certain?" "I have it confirmed by 2 independent reports. He arrived in London under the name Harold Carnaby and checked into the Whitcomb Club on Hanover Street. A man of his vanity could not resist returning to oversee matters himself. He knows Violet left messages and he suspects we've seen them." "And Trevelyan?" "He is also in London. They are circling each other like dogs guarding the same secret." Holmes struck a match and lit his pipe. "Tonight, we flush them both." At 8:30 that evening, I accompanied Holmes to the Marlborough Club, where he had arranged a private room under the name of Sir Adrian Rivington, a fictional reformist with connections to the press and Parliament. "I have sent identical notes to Trevelyan and Harcourt," Holmes said as we entered. "Each believes he is coming here to secure the envelope containing Violet Prescott's statement." "But there is no statement." "No," Holmes agreed, "but they believe there is. And that belief will force them to act." The room was sparse and elegant. 2 armchairs, a decanter of port, a stack of official-looking folders arranged conspicuously on a desk. Holmes positioned me behind a curtain, revolver discreetly holstered. At precisely 9 o'clock, the door opened. Henry Trevelyan stepped inside, calm as glass. He wore a dark overcoat and gloves, and his sharp gaze swept the room before settling on Holmes. "You sent for me?" he said. "I did. And you're not alone." Holmes gestured to the folders. "Before you reach for your pistol, yes, I know you carry one, I suggest you sit. You're not the only one coming tonight." Trevelyan hesitated, then took the offered chair. "I take it you've read what she wrote," he said. "She left more than one note," Holmes replied. "She left a trail." Trevelyan looked at his hands. "I didn't want her dead." "Is she dead?" Holmes asked sharply. "I don't know, I swear it." Before Holmes could respond, the door opened again. Colonel Sebastian Harcourt entered, older now, with silver at his temples and a walk slowed by time, but his eyes were as cold as a drawn blade. He looked from Trevelyan to Holmes and smiled faintly. "Well," he said, "how very theatrical." "Colonel Harcourt," Holmes greeted, "or shall I say, the man behind the curtain." Harcourt ignored the jab and walked to the desk. "I take it this is about Miss Prescott." "It is," Holmes replied. "And about your role in her disappearance." "She vanished," Harcourt said evenly. "That is unfortunate, but hardly uncommon." "She feared you," Holmes countered. "She named you, and your actions through Trevelyan confirm you wished her silenced." Harcourt turned to Trevelyan. "You failed." "I did what I could," Trevelyan said. "She was frightened, and she was right to be." Holmes interjected. "So you admit you were both involved?" "No," Trevelyan said. "Only one of us acted in fear, the other acted in calculation." Holmes folded his arms. She discovered something beyond what even she could articulate fully. "She saw a photograph," Trevelyan said quietly. "From an archive we kept at Langdon Street, Harcourt and others interrogating a foreign agent who never left the room alive. She identified Harcourt," Holmes said, "and once she did, she knew too much." Harcourt stepped forward. "This melodrama is tedious. What do you want, Mr. Holmes?" "To expose you." "To whom? The press? Parliament?" "No one will believe a mad woman's scribbled notes, and even if they did, they'd bury it. That's what institutions do." Holmes's voice was calm. "You're wrong. I sent a copy of the photograph to an MP under the pretext of an anonymous whistleblower. He requested an inquiry before this meeting ever began." Harcourt's jaw tensed. "You lie." "No," Holmes replied. "I illuminate." Trevelyan stood. "If you try to kill him, I won't help you," he said to Harcourt. Harcourt stared at him. "I said, bring her in, not bury her. You had no right." Harcourt reached into his coat, but Holmes moved faster. In one motion, he drew a revolver and leveled it at the colonel's chest. "Don't," Holmes said simply. From behind the curtain, I stepped forward, my own revolver raised. "This ends here." The moment hung in silence. Then, with slow resignation, Harcourt raised his hands. "You've no proof?" he said. "Perhaps not enough for a court," Holmes replied, "but enough for an inquiry. Enough to drag your name out of the shadows." Trevelyan turned to Holmes. "She's alive." "What? I couldn't do it," Trevelyan said. "I hid her, a cottage in Dorset under a friend's care. She's been ill, shaken, but she's alive." Holmes's expression softened slightly. "You've bought her time. Now buy her freedom." Trevelyan nodded slowly. "I'll testify against him, against myself if I must." Holmes lowered his revolver. "It may yet be enough." 2 weeks later, the newspapers ran a modest headline: "Retired Colonel questioned in intelligence oversight scandal." The details were scarce. Official statements muted the controversy. No names were printed, but those who needed to know knew. Violet Prescott was moved to a safe house abroad. Her testimony, carefully redacted, was deposited in government archives for a future less afraid of ghosts. Trevelyan vanished. Whether into protection or punishment, I was never told. And Holmes? He returned to his armchair, violin in hand, with the quiet air of a man who had once again stepped into darkness and returned intact. Some truths, he said, prefer shadow. But when you shine just enough light, even the darkest men blink.